Chapter 2188. Di Baichen did not send Bailey Hongzhuang back to her room. Instead he sent her to his own room. Bailey Hongzhuang had been researching and developing an antidote recently. The herbs and other things in the room were in a mess. It was not a suitable environment for her to rest. Along the way, Di Baichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's extremely pale face and felt as if his heart had been ruthlessly smashed. It was so painful that he found it difficult to breathe. He had secretly sworn that he would never let Bailey Hongzhuang suffer so much in the future. But this time he had still made Hongzhuang so exhausted that she had fainted. As he carried Bailey Hongzhuang, he could feel that Bailey Hongzhuang had become lighter again. In the past month, Bailey Hongzhuang had lost a lot of weight. He had painstakingly fattened Bailey Hongzhuang up, but now she was even thinner than before. Even though he was not a doctor, he could see how weak Bailey Hongzhuang was now. The three beasts were shocked when they saw Di Baichen carrying Bailey Hongzhuang back. But soon they realized that Bailey Hongzhuang had fallen into a coma. "What's wrong with Master?" Baisher quickly asked. "She has used up too much energy. Her body cannot take it anymore." Di Baichen said in a low voice. He was in a terrible mood. To him, nothing was more important than Hongzhuang. Now that Hongzhuang was so weak, he could only vent his anger on himself. "Master has been too tired these days. She has not slept a wink." Xiao He looked anxiously at Bailey Hongzhuang. They had been very worried when they saw their master's desperate look. They had not expected things to turn out this way. When Di Baichen carried Bailey Hongzhuang back, Mu Lingbing immediately went to find Gu Jinghe. Since Bailey Hongzhuang had vomited blood, the situation must be very serious. They had to get a doctor to take a look. Gu Jinghe was very anxious when she found out that Bailey Hongzhuang had fallen into a coma. She immediately went to find a doctor. Mu Jins had already fallen into such a situation. She could not let anything happen to Bailey Hongzhuang. After Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao found a doctor, they quickly headed to Bailey Hongzhuang's residence. After the doctor took Bailey Hongzhuang's pulse, his expression turned ugly. "What did you make her do? Her mental energy is so severely depleted and her body is so weak? She is a girl, you can't treat her like an iron man." The doctor had obviously never seen anyone who could be so exhausted. Originally he still maintained respect for Gu Jinghe and the others, but at this moment he couldn't help but speak with anger. He was a doctor of Sun Moon Palace and his status was not low. Bailey Hongzhuang was so young, but she was so exhausted. It was as if her body had been completely drained. He found it hard to imagine. Hearing the doctor's reprimand, everyone's expressions turned ugly. They felt deeply guilty. These days Bailey Hongzhuang was truly exhausted. They had only thought of Mu Jins and had not considered whether Bailey Hongzhuang could endure it. "Doctor, how is her condition? Will there be any problems?" Di Baichen quickly asked. This result was within his expectations. He was more concerned about whether Hongzhuang would be in any danger. "She needs to rest well and replenish her nutrition. Her body can be slowly replenished, but her mental energy can only be slowly recovered through rest." Chapter 2189. This young lady is young and her body's condition isn't bad. That's why she's been able to persevere until now. Every time her body is drained, it will have a huge impact. I will do my best to help her adjust. As for whether there will be any side effects, I can't guarantee it. The doctor was furious that Bailey Hongzhuang would be so exhausted. He didn't know what the first elder and the others had been busy with recently, but he couldn't allow a young lady to be so exhausted. If he didn't say this, no one would understand the severity of the problem. "Doctor, you must take good care of her." Di Baichen hastily pleaded the doctor. He absolutely couldn't let anything happen to Bailey Hongzhuang. That was something he couldn't bear. Dr. Su glanced at Di Baichen. He could see that Di Baichen was truly concerned about Bailey Hongzhuang. Only then did his expression soften. "I will do my best, but the most important thing right now is for her to rest well. I'm afraid she'll be unconscious for a while." Dr. Su looked at the unconscious Bailey Hongzhuang. It wasn't as if he had never seen someone so tired that they fainted. There were many cultivation maniacs in this world who didn't care about their own bodies in order to raise their cultivation. What shocked him was that he had never seen anyone like Bailey Hongzhuang who was in such a bad situation. He simply couldn't imagine how Bailey Hongzhuang had persevered until now. The more she was in this kind of situation, the more difficult it was to persevere. After Dr. Su left, Mu Lingbing and the others' expressions were extremely unsightly. "It's all our fault for putting all the pressure on Yishuan. Her body has already deteriorated to this extent, but we didn't know." Mu Lingbing's eyes gradually moistened. Looking at the deathly pale and unconscious Bailey Hongzhuang, she felt an indescribable heartache. As Bailey Hongzhuang's mother, she truly felt guilty. Lan Yunxiao's expression was gloomy and no emotion could be seen. But from his flickering eyes, one could see his heartache. Everyone fell silent. The current situation was something none of them wanted to see. However, under such circumstances they had no other choice. This feeling of helplessness made everyone feel even more uncomfortable. I'll stay here to take care of Hongzhuang. Uncle Auntie, you can go and rest first, Di Beichen said slowly, his deep voice somewhat stiff. When Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao heard Di Beichen's words, their gazes changed. It seemed that Di Beichen was still holding a grudge against Bailey Hongzhuang for being too tired. Before this, Di Beichen had already tried to persuade Bailey Hongzhuang to rest, even if it was only for one night. However, Bailey Hongzhuang did not agree. Instead, she immersed herself in developing the antidote. They also saw it, but under such circumstances they didn't know what to say. After all their hopes rested on Bailey Hongzhuang. Beichen, then take good care of Hongzhuang. We'll leave first. Mu Lingbing was about to say something, but Lan Yunxiao patted her shoulder, indicating for her to leave with him. Seeing this, Mu Lingbing glanced at Lan Yunxiao before walking out with him. Chapter 2190. Di Beichen understood that this was a situation that no one wanted to see. Rather than saying that he was angry at others, it was better to say that he was angry at himself. He couldn't help Hongzhuang in this matter at all. He could only let Hongzhuang bear it by herself. Looking at that pale and clean little face, he really felt his heart ache. The three beasties left the room together. Recently, Master had been busy concocting the antidote and rarely had time to spend with Di Beichen. At this time they naturally wouldn't be third wheels. White Lion, is Master's situation very bad right now? Xiao He and Xiao Bai looked at White Lion. The contract between White Lion and Master was different from theirs. White Lion and Master could sense each other's condition. White Lion nodded. Master's breathing is very weak, but her life isn't in danger. Hearing this, Xiao He and Xiao Bai relaxed. They had been with Master for so long, and this was definitely the most tiring time for her. When the three beasties walked out of the room, they saw Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao still standing outside, their faces full of worry. Uncle, Auntie, is grandmother feeling better after drinking Master's medicine? Xiao He asked. That medicine is indeed effective. The parasites in grandmother's body have already been suppressed, Mu Lingbing replied. At the last moment, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't disappoint and concocted a useful antidote. Hearing Mu Lingbing's words, joy surfaced on the three beasties' faces. In that case, Master's efforts during this period had been effective. Before Master left, she warned us that if she fainted, there were several portions of medicine in her room for grandmother to drink a bowl every day, Xiao Bai said slowly. This was what Master had specifically instructed them to do. As long as the medicine was effective, Mu Jins had to continue drinking it. Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao were both stunned by Xiao Bai's words. Yixuan already knew that she would faint? Master's body couldn't hold on any longer. The only reason he could hold on until today was because of his stubbornness. This morning she couldn't take the medicine anymore after she finished it. That's why she specifically instructed us to do this. White Lion felt a wave of sadness in his heart. Master was really suffering too much. They had tried to persuade their master, but to no avail. After that, they continued to accompany their master and no longer spoke of such matters. Because they didn't want their master to regret it. If their grandmother lost her life just like that, their master would definitely be very sad, so they could only choose to accompany her. Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao looked at each other. Their heartache and guilt intensified. Bailey Hongzhuang had truly done everything to the extreme. Over the next few days, Mu Jinsei's condition gradually improved as she continued to consume the medicinal soup. Just from Mu Jinsei's gradually improving complexion, it could be seen that Situ Yen was by Mu Jinsei's side every day, personally taking care of her. Bailey Hongzhuang remained in a deep sleep. Dr. Su had come to check on her several times and fed Bailey Hongzhuang some spirit medicine, hoping that she would recover quickly. Chapter 2191. 7 days later. Mu Jinsei slowly woke up, feeling a throbbing pain in her head. Just as she was about to move, she noticed a figure beside her bed. She thought it was Mu Lingbing who had fallen asleep beside her, but upon closer inspection, it was clearly a man. When Mu Jinsei saw the man's true appearance, her mind couldn't help but explode. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. She fell into a daze, unable to believe what she was seeing. How could this be? Mu Jinsei's first thought was that she had just woken up and wasn't clear-headed enough to see such a scene. However, when she looked again, she was certain that the person beside her was him. Si-Tu-Yen. This was the man she hated so much and who had ruined her life. She had wanted nothing to do with him for the rest of her life, but this man had actually appeared in front of her now. Get out of here. Mu Jinsei roared. The sudden voice woke Si-Tu-Yen up. He raised his head and saw that Mu Jinsei had woken up. He couldn't help but feel joy in his heart. However, when Si-Tu-Yen saw the sudden change in Mu Jinsei's expression, he realized that the situation was bad. Jinsei, get out of here. I don't want to see you. Mu Jinsei couldn't control her emotions. When she thought of her disfigured appearance, she hated that she couldn't just disappear. Jinsei, listen to my explanation. Si-Tu-Yen hurriedly said. Get out of here. Get out. Get out of here. Mu Jinsei didn't want to hear a single word from Si-Tu-Yen. She threw a pillow and a cup at him. Right now, she didn't have time to think about why Si-Tu-Yen was here. She only wanted him to disappear from her sight as soon as possible. Si-Tu-Yen panicked when he saw Mu Jinsei's hysterical state. Although he had expected that Mu Jinsei would be upset when she saw him, the situation in front of him had clearly exceeded his expectations. All right. I'll leave immediately. Don't be agitated. Si-Tu-Yen retreated as he comforted her. However, all of this was useless. Get out of here quickly. Mu Jinsei felt like she was going crazy. She had become like this and the last person she wanted to see was Si-Tu-Yen. She was such a proud woman, but now that Si-Tu-Yen had seen her most unbearable side, how could she not go crazy? Bang. Si-Tu-Yen hurriedly closed the door. He wasn't worried about Mu Jinsei scolding him. No matter how Mu Jinsei scolded him, he didn't care. It was just that Mu Jinsei had just woken up and her body had finally gotten better. He couldn't let his appearance affect Mu Jinsei's body. After Si-Tu-Yen disappeared from her sight, Mu Jinsei hurriedly got off the bed and locked the door. She gasped for breath as tears blurred her vision. She was now certain that the person she saw earlier was Si-Tu-Yen. She did not understand why Si-Tu-Yen would appear here, but she could not accept the way she was now. Why did it turn out like this? Mu Jinsei couldn't help but ask. What was this damn man doing here? He had already ruined her entire life and destroyed all her hopes. Could it be that he was still going to pity her now? Chapter 2192. When she thought of Si-Tu-Yen seeing her in such a sorry state, Mu Jinsei felt that she might as well just die. Even in that short period of time, she had seen the pain and guilt in Si-Tu-Yen's eyes. Mu Jinsei only found this even more laughable. When she had wanted to be with Si-Tu-Yen, Si-Tu-Yen had told her firmly that the person he wanted was Yu Siqing. She had left with bruises all over her body. Even though her face was covered in tears, Si-Tu-Yen had not hesitated at all when he had turned around. Since he had been so cruel to her at that time, why was he acting like he cared about her now? As for guilt? He had ruined her life and caused Ling Bing and Yi Xian to suffer so much. Now he was acting like he was feeling guilty? Wasn't this just too laughable? Mu Jinsei's eyes flashed with hatred, but after this hatred she wanted to cry even more. Mu Ling Bing had just finished boiling the medicine when she saw Si-Tu-Yen standing at the door with a disappointed expression. She couldn't help but ask, "Father, what's wrong?" Jinsei has woken up. It was just a simple sentence, but Mu Ling Bing understood what had happened and her expression changed. "Mother saw you? Did she chase you out in a frenzy?" In the past few days Mu Ling Bing had known that Mu Jinsei hated Si-Tu-Yen, but she had not explained it to Si-Tu-Yen. Now that Mu Jinsei had seen Si-Tu-Yen as soon as she woke up, she would definitely not be able to accept it. Si-Tu-Yen nodded. She has suffered a great blow and is in a terrible mood. Accompany her. Well, I'll go back first. Si-Tu-Yen understood that Mu Jinsei's misunderstanding of him was too deep. It was not something that could be resolved in a short period of time. If he continued to stay here, it would only make it harder for Mu Jinsei to calm down. Mu Ling Bing nodded and looked at Si-Tu-Yen's back as he left. She sighed in her heart. It wasn't easy for Si-Tu-Yen either. He had been misunderstood and hated all his life. She had to help him resolve this misunderstanding as soon as possible. Since Mu Jinsei had seen her, she might as well use this as a breakthrough to explain what had happened all those years ago. Just as Mu Ling Bing was about to push the door open, she found that it was locked. She couldn't help but shout, "Mother, it's me. Open the door." Hearing Mu Ling Bing's words, Mu Jinsei asked in a low voice, "You brought him here?" "Mother, this matter is complicated. I have to explain it to you properly." "You don't have to explain to me. I don't want to hear it. Mu Jin's attitude was firm. She didn't want to know anything about that man. Could it be that that man had come here to acknowledge Mu Lingbing and Lan Yixuan? Mother, let me in first. You haven't drunk your medicine today. Yixuan specially concocted this for you. I want to be alone. You can leave first. Mother, Yixuan has already been unconscious for many days in order to help you concoct the antidote. You can't let Yixuan down. If you don't drink the medicine, this goo poison can't be removed. Wouldn't that be making Yixuan work for nothing? Mu Lingbing naturally couldn't let Mu Jinsei stay here alone. She had to see Mu Jinsei and explain everything clearly. Hearing that Bailey Hongzhuang was unconscious, Mu Jinsei couldn't help but panic. What did you say? Yixuan is unconscious? Why is she unconscious? Chapter 2193. Mu Lingbing heaved a sigh of relief when she saw Mu Jinsei open the door. She was really worried that Mu Jin Southeast would close the door to her bedroom like before and seal herself up again. Yixuan has been thinking of ways to restrain the goo poison without rest these days. She fainted from exhaustion and has been in a coma for 7 days now. She hasn't woken up yet. Speaking of Bailey Hongzhuang, Mu Lingbing couldn't help but worry. Over the past few days, Situ Yin had been taking care of Mu Jinsei while she stayed at the residence to keep an eye on Bailey Hongzhuang's condition. She's tired because of me? Mu Jinsei was stunned and immediately understood. Her heart was filled with worry. Since I'm already in this state, how can I let Yixuan tire herself out because of me? How is she now? When will she wake up? Mu Jinsei never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would fall into such a state because of her. Her heart couldn't help but ache for her. Mu Lingbing shook her head. I don't know yet, but Dr. Su said that Yixuan's condition is gradually improving. Once she recovers, she will wake up. Mother, take care of your body first. Yixuan fainted because of you. If you don't get better, then Yixuan will be very disappointed when she wakes up. Hearing this, Mu Jinsei sighed. Yixuan is a good child. My old bones have already become like this and I'm actually dragging down a child. I really shouldn't have. Mother, Yixuan and I finally reunited with you. Yixuan naturally doesn't want anything to happen to you. Now that you've found a way to cure the goo poison, Yixuan's body is gradually improving. Overall, this is a good thing. Mu Lingbing handed the medicine to Mu Jinsei and Mu Jinsei drank it without hesitation. Just as Mu Lingbing said, she couldn't let all of Bailey Hongzhuang's efforts go to waste. Tell me about Yixuan's condition. I want to go see her. Alright, then let's go see her. Mu Lingbing didn't refuse. Mu Jinsei's condition seemed to have improved a lot. If she didn't let her take a look, Mu Jinsei wouldn't be at ease. Mu Jins wrapped herself up tightly before arriving at Bailey Hongzhuang's room. Lan Yunxiao and Di Beichen were shocked when they saw Mu Jins leaving her sleeping quarters. I'm here to see Yixuan. Mu Jinsei walked into the room. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's unconscious appearance, her eyes couldn't help but turn red. Her heart was in turmoil. It's all because of this useless grandmother of mine. Yixuan has suffered. After Di Beichen heard Mu Jinsei's words, the darkness in his eyes gradually disappeared. Mu Jinsei's line of sight couldn't help but fall on Di Beichen's body. Looking at this young and elegant young man, she couldn't help but ask, This is? Mother, this is Yixuan's sweetheart, Di Beichen. Mu Lingbing introduced. Greetings to grandmother. Di Beichen bowed. Although he had already met Mu Jinsei, this was her first time seeing him. Mu Jinsei nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. What a young and promising young man. He's extremely compatible with Yixuan. But this name seems somewhat familiar? Chapter 2194. Hearing Mu Jin's words, Di Beichen and Mu Lingbing looked at each other but neither of them continued the topic. Mu Jins was relieved when she found out that Bailey Hongzhuang's condition was gradually improving. As long as Bailey Hongzhuang was not in danger, her heart would feel a little better. However, when Mu Jins walked out of the room, she discovered that Si Tian was outside as well. Instantly, Mu Jin's expression darkened. She didn't even want to look at Si Tian as she walked towards the sleeping quarters. She never wanted to see this man again in this lifetime. She wanted to ask Mu Lingbing why she had allowed this man to appear here. Seeing this, Mu Lingbing followed behind Mu Jinsei and returned to the sleeping quarters. Today she had to explain this matter clearly. She believed that even if she didn't say anything, Mu Jins would definitely ask her. As expected, the moment they returned to the sleeping quarters, Mu Jins spoke with a gloomy expression. It was you who allowed that fellow to enter the Sun Moon Palace? Mu Jins found it hard to believe. That man had treated them so badly and Mu Lingbing had still allowed him to enter. Furthermore, she had never heard Mu Lingbing mention anything about Si Tian before this. However, when she had been unconscious, it had been Si Tian who had been by her side. This was simply too hard for her to accept. Mu Lingbing nodded, yes. After receiving Mu Lingbing's confirmation, Mu Jin's felt an indescribable rage rise in her chest. Why did you let that man in? Hasn't he done enough for you all these years? Mu Jin's couldn't understand. Even if Si Tian was Mu Lingbing's father by blood, that man had done nothing for her all these years. Mother, actually there was a hidden story behind what happened back then. It's not what you think. I don't want to hear any explanations. I just want that man to leave. Mu Jin's attitude was firm. Lingbing, he is your father. If you want to acknowledge him, that's your freedom. I won't stop you. Similarly, I don't want to see this man either. This is my choice. When Mu Lingbing saw Mu Jin's resolute attitude, she understood that all these years, Mu Jin's hated Si Tuyen to the bone. In the past, Mu Jinsei still had deep feelings for Si Tuyen. However, everything that happened after that was like a sharp knife that pierced Mu Jinsei's heart again and again, causing her to completely lose all hope for Si Tuyen. Mother, let's not talk about anything else. Let's talk about it calmly. Actually, the people who saved me from Yu Siqing were Yishuan and Si Tuyen. In front of Mu Jinsei, Mu Lingbing could only call Si Tuyen by his name. If she had used any other form of address, Mu Jinsei would have been even more agitated. Hearing Mu Lingbing's words, Mu Jinsei paused slightly, but her expression remained cold. So what? It's all thanks to him that you and Yun Xiao fell into such a situation. Are we supposed to be grateful to him for saving all of you? Don't say these meaningless words to me. Get out first. Mu Jinsei obviously didn't want to discuss this matter with Mu Lingbing any further. Since things had already come to this point, no matter what Si Tuyen did, it would all be in vain. Chapter 2195. When Mu Lingbing saw Mu Jinsei's unyielding attitude, she quickly told her everything that had happened. However, Mu Jinsei clearly didn't believe her. She had personally experienced everything that had happened. It was Si Tuyen who had clearly told her that he wouldn't be with her and that the person who would be with him was Yu Siqing. Even though several decades had passed, she still remembered this scene clearly. Had Si Tuyen changed his story in order to give Mu Lingbing a good impression of him? However, she was still alive and she remembered everything clearly. She was such a proud woman. After she had given Si Tuyen her chastity, she had been waiting for him to make a promise to her. However, she had never thought that Si Tuyen would be such a heartless man. The heavens had played a huge joke on her. In just one night, Si Tuyen and Yu Siqing were together. It was as if, from the start, Si Tuyen had never been true to her. He had only treated her as a plaything and had casually tossed her aside. She had wanted him to stay and give her an explanation, but he hadn't even given her the chance. He had swiftly turned around and led Yu Siqing away like a victor. He had ruthlessly trampled her pride under his feet and shattered it all over the floor. Mu Jinsei pushed Mu Lingbing out of the room. She really didn't want to have anything to do with that man. It would only make her feel that she had been a joke. However, just as Mu Lingbing was about to leave the room, she said something. At that time, Si Tuyen thought that the person that night was Yu Siqing. Yu Siqing had drugged him and caused Si Tuyen to misunderstand. Mu Lingbing looked at the tightly shut doors of the bedchamber, a look of helplessness on her face. The grudge from back then was too deep and it wasn't going to be easy to resolve it now. It looked like this matter wouldn't be resolved in a short period of time. She could only let Si Tuyen slowly explain. After all, Si Tuyen had caused Mu Jinsei so much pain for so many years. Si Tuyen would definitely spend a lot of time before he could open Mu Jinsei's heart. She believed that Si Tuyen had already made preparations for this. Mu Lingbing tried a few times, but when she saw that Mu Jinsei didn't show any signs of opening the door, she finally left. However, Mu Lingbing didn't know how much shock her last words had brought to Mu Jinsei. Mu Jinsei had never thought of such a possibility. That night, Si Tuyen had indeed acted very strangely. If all of this was Yu Siqing's trap, then Mu Jinsei's body, which was leaning against the door, couldn't help but slide to the ground. If this was all a misunderstanding, then she couldn't imagine such an outcome, nor could she believe that all of this was real. 3 days later, Bailey Hongzhuang slowly woke up. Di Beichen had been guarding by Bailey Hongzhuang's side the whole time. When he saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had woken up, he couldn't help but have a look of joy on his face. "Wife, you're awake." Di Beichen hurriedly poured a glass of water and brought it to Bailey Hongzhuang's lips. Bailey Hongzhuang indeed felt thirsty. She only felt better after drinking the entire glass of water. Di Beichen, how long have I been unconscious? You've been unconscious for 10 days. Di Beichen's heart ached. Chapter 2196. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was concerned about Mu Jin's condition the moment she woke up, Di Beichen's heart ached even more. Don't worry, grandmother's condition is very good. She has already woken up and the antidote you made is very effective. Hearing Di Beichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang felt relieved. Previously, she had only confirmed that the antidote had a certain effect, but she didn't know what happened after that. That's good. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Grandmother was finally fine. As long as she confirmed that the antidote was effective, she was confident that she could completely remove the goo poison from her grandmother's body. Previously, she didn't know that it was a goo poison, which was why she spent so much time. Now that she had a better understanding of the goo poison, it wouldn't be difficult to get rid of it. Wife, how do you feel? Is there any part of your body that doesn't feel well? After Di Beichen asked, the three beasts came over. Master, don't think about anything else. The most important thing is your body. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. Don't worry, I'm just exhausted. It won't affect me much. As a doctor herself, she understood her own condition very well. Long before she had fainted, she had already understood her own body's condition. It was because she understood her own body that she decided to give it a try. Master, Dr. Su said that doing this will harm your body and leave behind repercussions in the future. Xiaohei said seriously. Every time something happens to someone else, Master would always do her best. But how could she not take good care of her own body? Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang was stunned for a moment before she understood. I won't let my body have any repercussions. Don't worry. This kind of deficit did have a certain effect. After all, there would always be problems when the body's energy was completely depleted. However, she had a way to adjust to this situation, so she didn't need to worry. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't being perfunctory, Di Beichen and the three beasts were relieved. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills were not comparable to ordinary doctors. Master, is Yu Xiqing's poison technique that powerful? White Lion could not help but ask. In the past, Yu Xiqing had made so many poisons, and Master had been able to neutralize them all in a short period of time. However, this time, Master was exhausted to such an extent that he could only neutralize it. It could be seen that Yu Xiqing was powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. This goo poison was not controlled by Yu Xiqing. She must have obtained this goo worm by chance. If I'm not wrong, she should only have one goo, and she chose to put it on her grandmother. From the previous confrontation, Bailey Hongzhuang already had a direct understanding of Yu Xiqing's poison skills. The poison that Yu Xiqing had concocted had nothing to do with goo poison. It was because of this that she had never thought of goo poison. If Yu Xiqing was very familiar with goo poison, then the poison she concocted would not be like this. I see. The three beasts finally understood. She had used the most vicious goo poison on her grandmother. How abominable. Next time I will prepare an even bigger gift for her. Chapter 2197. When they found out that Bailey Hongzhuang had regained consciousness, Mu Lingbing and the others all ran over in joy. To everyone, the sky had cleared up after the storm. Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Jins were both safe and sound. This was the best news. After Bailey Hongzhuang had regained consciousness, her body had quickly recovered. Dr. Su was extremely shocked when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang's speedy recovery. When he found out about Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills, he was even more astonished. To possess such medical skills at such a young age, she was truly worthy of being called a genius doctor. Mother, has maternal grandmother been shutting herself in her bedchamber all this time? After Bailey Hongzhuang learned about Mu Jin's situation, she couldn't help but frown. As early as before, they had already expected that once Situ Yen appeared in front of Mu Jins would inevitably lose control of her emotions. Initially, they had planned to completely cure Mu Jins before Situ Yen went to see Mu Jins. At least this way, they would be able to preserve Mu Jins' self-esteem and pride. However, none of them had expected that Mu Jins would be able to see Situ Yen first. This made the situation even more difficult to handle. The way I see it, the knot in your maternal grandmother's heart isn't something that can be easily untied. It's a long road ahead. Mu Lingbing sighed. She had been telling Mu Jins about what had happened in the past every day, and she had already explained everything that needed to be explained. She believed that Mu Jins would have heard everything she had said from within the bedchamber. However, Mu Jinsei did not respond from the start to the end, so there was nothing she could do. Since maternal grandmother can't accept it, we don't need to be anxious. Bailey Hongzhuang was very calm. She believed that maternal grandmother's thoughts would gradually change after finding out about this. However, she had held a grudge for too many years and it would take some time for her to let go. Let's not talk about this with maternal grandmother for now. Let me get rid of the goo poison in maternal grandmother's body and restore her looks. I believe that everything will slowly get better. Mu Lingbing nodded. She couldn't help but grab Bailey Hongzhuang's hand, her eyes filled with anticipation. Yixuan, can you really restore your grandmother's appearance? As long as the goo poison is removed and I clear out the poison in her body one by one, grandmother will definitely be able to recover her looks. Bailey Hongzhuang's face rippled with an elegant and confident smile. She had already conquered this goo poison. Completely eliminating it was absolutely not a problem. That's great. Over the next few days, Bailey Hongzhuang helped Mu Jinsei recover her appearance. At first, Mu Jinsei didn't believe that her appearance could be restored, but when she saw the charred black on her body gradually dissipating, and her skin slowly recovering, she had no choice but to believe it. This time, Bailey Hongzhuang surprised her even more and filled her with hope. She thought that she would have to live like this for the rest of her life, but now she had the chance to see the light of day again. This was simply her dream. 7 days later, when Mu Jinsei walked out into the sunlight again, Mu Lingbing and the rest were shocked. This was because the Mu Jinsei in front of him was still that elegant and charming woman from back then. Compared to her elegant and refined appearance in the past, the passage of time had caused her to become more elegant and tolerant. Chapter 2198. When Gu Jinghe saw Mu Jinsei in this state, her tears couldn't help flowing. She thought she would never see Mu Jinsei again in this lifetime. She didn't expect Mu Jinsei to be able to return to her original state. When Mu Jinsei saw Gu Jinghe, her eyes were also filled with tears. After she left Tiangang sect, she and Gu Jinghe were like sisters. All these years it was Gu Jinghe who had helped her. However, after she was disfigured, she didn't want Gu Jinghe to see her like this, so she hid. Palace Master. Gu Jinghe choked with sobs. Jinghe? The two sisters hadn't seen each other for more than 10 years. At this moment they were both speechless. Mu Lingbing covered her mouth with her hand, afraid she would cry out loud. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang had promised that she would be able to restore Mu Jinsei to her original state, when this scene really appeared in front of her, her heart was filled with unspeakable shock. She really recovered. Lan Yunxiao was also in disbelief. Lan Yunxiao also found it hard to believe. He was very clear on what Mu Jinsei looked like before, but Bailey Hongzhuang actually had a way to restore her. She was really too powerful. Di Beichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang, who was standing next to Mu Jinsei, with a face full of smiles. She had done it. She had turned the rotten into the miraculous, turning the impossible into the possible. A family reunion. She had really done it. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other. There was no need for words. Now they only needed Situ Yen and Mu Jinsei's relationship to improve. Then they would truly have a family reunion. They could embark on another journey. In the distance, Situ Yen secretly watched Mu Jinsei recover her original appearance. His heart was filled with uncontrollable excitement. However, even now Mu Jinsei was still unwilling to see him, so he could only hide in the distance and quietly watch. No matter what, as long as he saw Mu Jinsei recover, he was already very happy. As for what he owed Mu Jinsei in the past, he was willing to use his entire life to repay it. He believed that there would be a day when Mu Jinsei would accept him. Even if Mu Jinsei didn't accept him, as long as he had the chance to treat Mu Jinsei well, that was his happiness. After Mu Jinsei's body recovered, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others discussed and decided to return to Tiangang sect. After all, they had left Tiangang sect for a long time. Although the elders and hall masters had been taking care of Tiangang sect, it was not appropriate for them to never go back. There were always some things that needed someone to oversee the sect. When Mu Jinsei found out that Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest were preparing to leave, she was also very surprised. You want to return to Tiangang sect? Why don't you just stay in the Sun Moon Palace? That way your grandmother can take care of you. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Grandma, I will come to see you often. Beichen is the young master of Tiangang sect. After leaving the sect for so long, I have to go back and have a look. Hearing this, Mu Jinsei unhappily said, You guys stay behind and let that old fellow leave. He is the sect master of Tiangang sect. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but snicker. Grandfather still has the most important thing in his life to do. We can't let grandfather delay this important matter, so we can only help. These days, Situ Yen had completely exhausted Mu Jin's. Chapter 2199. After seeing Situ Yan's appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang also understood who Di Beichen had taken after when he pursued her. However, Bailey Hongzhuang naturally wouldn't say this out loud. Previously, Mu Jin's had tried to chase Situ Yen out of Sun Moon Palace. However, Great Elder Gu Jinghe had become an accomplice after learning of the situation. Every time Situ Yen was chased out, Gu Jinghe would let him in again. Thus, Mu Jin's attempts to chase him out were completely useless. In the end, Mu Jin's was too lazy to say anything. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest saw Situ Yen and Mu Jin's game of cat and mouse, they found it extremely funny. However, the two elders had already wasted their entire lives. Now that there was a chance for them to reconcile, they naturally thought of ways to help. After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Mu Jin's expression was awkward and unnatural. She was already so old, yet she was still being laughed at by her granddaughter and grandson-in-law. She was truly embarrassed. Grandmother, grandfather already knows his wrongs. If possible, please forgive him. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was full of smiles. They could feel that Mu Jin's attitude was gradually changing. As long as a few more days passed, they believed that everything would change. Mu Jin's didn't reply to Bailey Hongzhuang's words and said, "Then be careful on the road. Come to Sun Moon Palace when you have time." Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. "Grandmother, we will definitely come back often. Yixuan, you and Beichen have to take good care of yourselves. We will also return in a few days." Mu Lingbing smiled. Mu Lingbing had grown up in Sun Moon Palace since she was young. Now that she was staying in Sun Moon Palace, she felt more at ease. Moreover, Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao didn't know how to arrange their identities after they went to Tiangang's sect, so it was better for them to stay in Sun Moon Palace. The poison in their bodies had already been purged, but their cultivation had decreased greatly. Sun Moon Palace was rich in origin energy, so they had to stay here and cultivate properly, striving to recover their strength as soon as possible. Only after they recovered their strength could they return to the Lan family. Father-mother will be leaving first. Bailey Hongzhuang was full of smiles. This kind of separation was not really a separation for them at all. She believed that the next time they met, they would all be better. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen left the Tiangang sect. The incident with the medicine sect had caused the Tiangang sect to become the focus of attention of all forces. This time they had been away for such a long time. Presumably, there were many things that needed to be dealt with in the sect. Obviously, it was impossible for Situ Yen to return to Tiangang's sect in a short time, so this heavy responsibility was completely handed over to Di Beichen. According to Situ Yan's words, Di Beichen was fully qualified to be the sect master of Tiangang's sect. As long as he reconciled with Mu Jinsei, he would stay in Sun Moon Palace. He didn't intend to care about the matters of Tiangang's sect. Regarding this, Di Beichen only felt helpless. However, Master had been busy for so many years. Now he could indeed enjoy his life. Since he was young, he had hoped that Master would be able to fulfill his wishes and enjoy his old age happily. Now that Master had found what he wanted, he naturally wouldn't obstruct Master. This time, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen left with smiles on their faces. During this time they had made great progress. The next time they came to Sun Moon Palace, they wouldn't be stopped outside the mountain. Chapter 2200. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen returned to Tiangang's sect in high spirits. Ever since her grandmother had recovered from her injuries, Bailey Hongzhuang could finally relax. She had never felt so relaxed before. In the past, too many things had piled up in her heart. She was worried that she would not be able to save her parents in time and worried that her grandmother was no longer in this world. Fortunately, the heavens were not so cruel to them and everything had changed for the better. If Yu Xiqing knew that she had allowed Mu Jin's to enjoy years of torture in exchange for giving them a chance to reunite as a family, Yu Xiqing's expression would be even more sinister. However, before Bailey Hongzhuang began her revenge, she would not let Yu Xiqing know about this. Previously, when she had removed the child worm from Mu Jin's body, Bailey Hongzhuang had not killed the child worm but had kept it. If there was a chance, the child worm would be very useful in the future. Wife, guess when Master will be able to reconcile with you and grandmother? Di Beichen was clearly in a good mood. Along the way he would occasionally joke with Bailey Hongzhuang. The knot in grandmother's heart is very deep. Although she now knows the origin of everything, based on grandmother's character, she will not be able to accept it in a short period of time. Her delicate and beautiful face was filled with a confident smile. Bailey Hongzhuang understood that Mu Jin's was a proud person. Even if Mu Jin's hatred towards Si Tuyen had been completely erased, it would not be easy for her to put down her pride and accept Si Tuyen. However, the only thing she could be sure of was the final outcome: they would be together in the end. Master's abilities are not bad. I feel that this day will not be too far away. Di Baichen was full of smiles. His already handsome face was now filled with warmth and brightness, like the resplendent sunlight, dazzling people's eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang turned her head to look at Di Baichen beside her. She only felt that the sunlight and Di Baichen's smile contrasted together, warming her heart. Wife, after we return to Tiangang's sect, the competition between the 4 halls will begin. Di Baichen restrained his smile, and his handsome face was full of serious color. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows. She had previously heard that there would be a competition between the 4 palaces, but she was not clear on the exact time of the competition. Is this competition very important? Why do you look so serious? Bailey Hongzhuang asked. Di Baichen nodded. This competition is indeed very important. As soon as he said that, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression turned serious. Since Di Baichen said so bluntly that this competition was very important, then it must be very important. The competition between the 4 halls is only an internal competition within Tiangang's sect and is not considered important. However, this competition was related to another matter. Every 3 years, the major sects and aristocratic families would jointly hold a competition. As long as one could obtain an outstanding performance in this competition, they would be rewarded handsomely. These rewards were jointly provided by the various sects and aristocratic families, so the richness of the rewards could be imagined. To the disciples, the most important thing was naturally the rewards. However, to the various powers, the most important thing was the ranking. This competition can reflect the strength of the various sects to a certain extent. If one's ranking was low, it would be a loss of face. Chapter 2201. To you, as long as you participate in this competition, you will be able to compete with Lan Qingyan on the same platform. Di Baichen's words exploded in Bailey Hongzhuang's heart. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze suddenly froze and a complicated expression emerged on her charming face. Lan Qingyan. This name had long been engraved in her heart. This woman had snatched everything from her, and now she was shamelessly enjoying something that did not belong to her. She had always wanted to compete with Lan Qingyan, and now this opportunity had appeared in front of her. All the major sects and aristocratic families will place their most outstanding successors and youths in this competition. Lan Qingyan, as the most famous person in the Lan family, will definitely participate. This point there was no need to doubt. So, I have to obtain a good enough result in this 4 palaces exchange competition before I can participate in this competition? Bailey Hongzhuang immediately understood the crux of this. If this was really the case, then this competition between the 4 palaces she was determined to win. Di Baichen nodded. That's right. When will the competition between the 4 palaces be held? 3 months later. Then what about that competition? 6 months later, I will also participate. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded lightly. These days, she had been delving into the art of medicine and poison and had delayed her cultivation. However, after such a high level of deficit, her mental strength had increased by quite a bit compared to before. There are still 3 months' time. I will go into closed-door cultivation. That competition I will definitely participate. She would not miss this opportunity. Lan Qingyan, there's still half a year's time before we can meet again. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a mocking arc. They had exchanged lives for close to 20 years and now it was time to exchange it back. Di Baichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes that flashed with a resolute light. He understood that in these 3 months' time, Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely cultivate bitterly. He was also looking forward to the wonderful expression on Lan Qingyan's face when she saw Bailey Hongzhuang. When Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang returned to Tiangang sect together, Tiangang sect could not help but be in an uproar. However, compared to the time when everyone doubted Bailey Hongzhuang, the situation now was undoubtedly much better. Ever since Bailey Hongzhuang turned the tide in the alchemist competition, proving her ability and redeeming everyone's honor, everyone's doubts towards Bailey Hongzhuang had lessened. No matter whether they accepted it or not, the young sect master and Bailey Hongzhuang were together. Moreover, the two of them looked as though their love was stronger than gold. It was totally not what they had guessed previously that they would part soon. Di Baichen immediately went to the conference hall. He needed to understand the sect's situation during this period of time when they were not around. The 4 palace masters and the Pill Refinery Palace Master all went to the conference hall, along with the various elders. Since the young sect master had returned, they were bound to report everything. Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. She had not returned for a long time. Now that she had decided to go into closed-door cultivation, she had to be prepared for it. Luckily, the Chaos Ring had the existence of the desert world. Although it was only 3 months' time, she could extend it by a lot. Chapter 2202. Bailey Hongzhuang had always been a steady cultivator. Even though elixirs were very effective in raising one's strength, Bailey Hongzhuang did not consume much of them. Based on her current situation, there was still a large gap between her and Lan Qingyin's strength. Therefore, she wanted to raise her strength by 1 point. With her current foundation, it was not a problem for her to raise her strength from the 6th level of the Green Realm to the 7th level of the Green Realm by consuming elixirs. Therefore, Bailey Hongzhuang went into seclusion the moment she entered the house. She wanted to use this night to break through to the 7th level of the Green Realm. In order to be able to appear in front of the Lan family, in order to be able to compete with Lan Qingyin, she had waited for a long time. Now that the opportunity had finally arrived, she naturally wouldn't miss it. While Bailey Hongzhuang was in seclusion to break through to the 6th level of the Green Realm, Di Beichen was listening to the elders and the palace master's report. Young Lord, the martial arts championship will begin in half a year. We have to prepare in advance and select some outstanding disciples to participate with you. The Azure Dragon Palace Master, Yan Kaiqing, had a serious and dignified expression. The martial arts championship was a grand occasion in the entire Xingxian continent. As long as one could achieve good results in the martial arts championship, one would be truly famous. Tiangang's sect's strength had never been weak. They could not perform badly in the martial arts championship. Di Beichen nodded slightly. Same old rules. The 4 palaces competition will be held in 3 months to select outstanding disciples. The next 3 months will be a unified experience to raise one's strength. All the palace masters and elders can begin to inform the disciples of this news so that they can prepare early. Although Di Beichen knew a lot about the martial arts championship, he had never participated in it. If his leg had not been injured previously, he would have competed in the previous martial arts championship. However, Tiangang's sect was represented by someone else at that time. This time, as the young lord of Tiangang's sect, he would personally lead the disciples to compete. He must achieve good results. Hearing Di Beichen's arrangement, the palace masters and elders all nodded. It seemed that Di Beichen had already thought of a way to deal with this matter without their reminder. Looks like the battle of the 4 palaces this time is going to be exceptionally exciting. Qin Ai's face was brimming with smiles. Usually, there were still many disciples who liked to preserve their strength during the competition of the 4 halls and did not display their full strength. However, the battle of the 4 palaces this time was related to the martial arts championship. He believed that no matter which disciple it was, they would not give up such an opportunity to become famous. All the disciples would definitely use their trump cards. The hall masters and elders all smiled and nodded after hearing this. Their Tiangang sect had many disciples and countless genius disciples. Once the fighting spirit of these disciples was aroused, it would absolutely be a fierce battle between dragons and tigers. Now they could start looking forward to it. Di Beichen's eyes darkened. Just as Qin Ai had said, the competition between the 4 palaces this time would be unprecedentedly difficult. Bailey Hongzhuang came to Tiangang's sect for only a short time, and during this period of time she put her energy in other aspects. If she wanted to stand out in the battle of the 4 palaces, it would definitely not be an easy task. However, Di Beichen was still full of confidence in Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2203. When the news of the battle of the 4 palaces and the martial arts tournament spread in Tiangang's sect, all the disciples were full of excitement and shock. Some disciples who did not know about the martial arts tournament even asked about it. After knowing the importance of the martial arts tournament, all the disciples could not help but be full of expectations. Such a good opportunity, every disciple had a chance. Of course, the premise was that their own strength was strong enough. Some disciples who did not cultivate with all their strength only felt regret after knowing about this. If they knew that the martial arts tournament was about to begin, they would have cultivated with all their strength. If they watched this opportunity slip away in front of their eyes, it was really unbearable. Similarly, some disciples who were extremely diligent on weekdays only felt that they had waited for so long and finally waited for a good opportunity. They had long been eager and could not hold back. Bailey Hongzhuang, who was cultivating in the house, did not know that the news had exploded in Tiangang's sect. Until the next day when the sky gradually brightened, Bailey Hongzhuang opened her eyes. As she thought, with the effect of the elixir she successfully broke through to the 7th level of the Green Realm. Moreover, after breaking through to the 7th level of the Green Realm, she found that there was still a part of the elixir in her body. As she cultivated, this part of the elixir would be completely absorbed by her and her cultivation would be improved again. During this time, although Bailey Hongzhuang had put all her energy on her parents and grandmother, her cultivation still had a certain progress. Therefore she was not far from breaking through to the 7th level of the Green Realm. With the elixir it was even faster. When Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu were preparing to go to the meditation field in the morning, they unexpectedly saw Bailey Hongzhuang coming out of the house. Their faces suddenly showed a strong surprise. "Hongzhuang, when did you come back?" Xia Jiqing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise. Since the end of the alchemist competition, they had not seen Hongzhuang and did not know when Hongzhuang came back. "I just came back yesterday." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "Hongzhuang, have you heard? The Battle of the Four Palaces this time concerns the martial arts championship." Xia Jiqing quickly walked to the side of Bailey Hongzhuang. The news had only come out yesterday and everyone was very concerned about it. There were many outstanding disciples in Tiangang's sect, not to mention that the strength of those senior disciples was far stronger than them. In comparison, this batch of new disciples basically had no hope. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was not something an ordinary new disciple could compare to. As long as Bailey Hongzhuang worked hard, she might have a chance to participate. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, "I've already heard. This time, whether it's the Battle of the Four Palaces or the Martial Arts Championship, it's a great opportunity for us. All of you must do your best." Even if he could not participate in the Martial Arts Championship, as long as he could perform well in the Battle of the Four Palaces and gain the attention of the Palace Master, it would be good enough. "We will, Hongzhuang, you have to work harder." Xia Jiqing smiled. "I will." Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were sharp. This time she would definitely get a place in the Martial Arts Championship. Chapter 2204. "Hongzhuang, are you going to meditate now? Then let's go together." Bai Junyu said with a smile. Today's Bailey Hongzhuang was much busier than before. They could only choose not to ask as long as Bailey Hongzhuang had a good life. "You go first, I'm going to find Di Beichen," Bailey Hongzhuang said with a smile. Although the concentration of power in the meditation room was much richer than in other places, Di Beichen's cultivation room was even richer. For her now, there was nothing more important than improving her strength, so she didn't have any time to waste. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu also understood, and immediately smiled and nodded. They all understood that Bailey Hongzhuang would never miss such an opportunity, and presumably now she would seize every second. When Bailey Hongzhuang came to Di Beichen's palace, she found that there was no Di Beichen in the palace, and then went directly into the cultivation room. Sure enough, Bailey Hongzhuang saw Di Beichen in the cultivation room. "Wife, you are here." Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang coming, Di Beichen's face quickly filled with a happy smile. Looking carefully, Di Beichen suddenly found that Bailey Hongzhuang's aura had changed, and the smile in his eyes suddenly deepened. In one night, wife has broken through to the 7th level of the Green Realm. Yesterday, Bailey Hongzhuang told him that she was going back to retreat, and he didn't think much about it. He didn't expect that in just one night, Bailey Hongzhuang had successfully broken through. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. "There are many excellent disciples in the Four Temples. If I want to get a place, don't I have to work hard?" Originally, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know enough about the strength of these disciples, but after knowing the strength of Di Beichen and Xiren, she knew how big the gap between them was. The strength of the disciples of Tiangang's sect couldn't be compared with Di Beichen, but some of the powerful cultivators wouldn't be much worse. In contrast, the pressure on her was really not small. She didn't know how strong Lan Qingyan was now, but if she guessed correctly, Lan Qingyan's cultivation was definitely not worse than Di Beichen and Xiren. Because Lan Qingyan was a talented cultivator with the colorful pearl. The colorful pearl could help a cultivator save a lot of time during cultivation. Ever since she had the colorful pearl, Bailey Hongzhuang already deeply understood how big the gap was. Lan Qingyan already had it since she was young. After so many years, she saved a lot of time compared to others. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichen chuckled, "Wife, your strength is also very strong. Let's seize the time to cultivate. Let's go to the desert world first." Bailey Hongzhuang had already thought of a cultivation method. They would cultivate in the desert world for 3 days, then meditate in the cultivation room to recover. In this way, not only would their battle strength be improved, the effect of cultivation after their spirit power was exhausted would also be better. Di Beichen nodded slightly. He was also very interested in the desert world, especially those strange demonic beasts that he had never seen before. They always had different characteristics when fighting. The 3 beasts immediately came up. We also have to work hard. As contracted beasts, they were part of their master's strength. No matter if it was a competition or other times, they were allowed to appear. Chapter 2205. Although Lan Qingyan started cultivating much earlier than Master, it was impossible for Lan Qingyan to have 3 contracted beasts like Master. At least in this aspect they had better conditions than Lan Qingyan. Therefore they must display their strength and help Master completely defeat Lan Qingyan. In the following period of time, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen entered the desert world to cultivate at night and meditated in the cultivation room to absorb elemental energy during the day. Regarding such high-intensity cultivation, whether it was Di Beichen, Bailey Hongzhuang, or even the 3 beasts, none of them had any objections. Normally they might be able to relax a little, but at such a critical moment, no one had the slightest thought of relaxing. At the same time, the benefits of such high-intensity cultivation were also extremely shocking. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others encountered more and more powerful demonic beasts in the desert world. Their battle methods also became more and more varied. Every battle was thrilling. Because there was a big gap in strength between Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Di Beichen often dealt with the most difficult ones while Bailey Hongzhuang dealt with the slightly weaker ones. The 3 beasts also went all out in this desert world. Xiao He and Xiao Bai's figures changed size at will and they became more and more proficient in using the yin-yang 8 trigrams formation. Previously, Xiao He and Xiao Bai also spent a lot of effort to cultivate the yin-yang 8 trigrams formation, but they didn't have much opportunity to test it on normal days. Ever since they had this desert world, they didn't have to worry about not having a place to test it. What they were most worried about was exhausting the elemental energy in their body and the demonic beasts attacking again. That was the worst. Di Beichen also felt the benefits of this desert world. The demonic beasts here were endless, and the deeper they went, the stronger they were. He didn't have any suitable opponents when cultivating in Tiangang's sect. In the past, Master would occasionally spar with him, but now there was no chance. If he didn't have this desert world, he could only leave Tiangang's sect to find a place to cultivate. However, with this desert world, it was undoubtedly much more convenient. In the process of fighting in the desert world, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also found that these blood demon crystals were not harmful to Baisher. On the contrary, they could promote the growth of Baisher's cultivation base. The effect seemed to be stronger than the usual demon crystals. Usually, Bailey Hongzhuang had to spend a lot of effort just to prepare enough rations for Baisher. Now that they were here, Baisher's rations were completely solved, which was undoubtedly a good thing. In the process of consuming the blood demon crystal, Baisher's strength continued to rise. Not only Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen, but all the disciples of Tiangang Zong were working hard to cultivate, in order to amaze the world in 3 months and be famous in 6 months. As the young sect master of Tiangang's sect, Di Beichen was even more willing to part with these cultivation resources. The martial arts championship was a competition that every force attached great importance to. If they fell in the rankings in this martial arts championship, the reputation of the sect would be damaged. As the representative of Tiangang's sect, Di Beichen had to perform well in this martial arts championship. Therefore, when Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen retreated from the desert world, they used the cultivation resources while cultivating in the cultivation room. As a result, the speed at which his strength was increasing had increased by a few notches. Chapter 2206. Bailey Hongzhuang felt that time had passed extremely quickly as she cultivated like an ascetic monk. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. To other cultivators it might have been 3 months, but to Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen, it was close to a year's time. For an entire year, if they weren't fighting in the desert world, they were cultivating in the cultivation room. Wife, the competition of the 4 palaces will begin tomorrow. It's time for us to come out of seclusion. Di Beichen turned to look at Bailey Hongzhuang beside him. They had been in seclusion for so long. If they still didn't come out, the palace masters and elders would be worried. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. It's time for me to return to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang still didn't know what the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had planned for the competition of the 4 palaces. If she didn't go and find out today, she might not even know how the competition was going to be tomorrow. I also need to find the palace masters and elders to discuss this in the conference hall. Di Beichen smiled. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other, then walked out of the cultivation room together. Xiao He and Xiao Bai leaped onto Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulders, while Baisher followed beside Bailey Hongzhuang. In this year's time, Baisher's figure had become even more muscular than before. Walking beside Bailey Hongzhuang, he was like a majestic lion, very eye-catching. Once they left the bedroom, Bailey Hongzhuang quickly rushed to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Speaking of which, she could be considered as the least involved disciple in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Ever since she had become a disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she rarely stayed in the Palace Hall and didn't know anything about the Palace Hall. As a disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she didn't even receive the cultivation resources that she was supposed to receive every month. After she had verified her strength at the ranking pillar, she had never gone back for another verification. Perhaps, the current her had already become in existence at the bottom of the Vermilion Bird Palace's ranking pillar. After all, every disciple in the sect improved their strength very quickly. Although her ranking back then wasn't bad after so long, the cultivation of the new disciples had already increased. Fortunately, with her current conditions, she didn't need to worry about how many cultivation resources she needed every month. This was the innate condition of being a proud son of heaven. In the past, she had climbed up step by step from the grassroots. But now she was someone with a backer. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang rushed to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu were as anxious as ants on a hot pan. Junyu, could it be that Hongzhuang has cultivated so much that she doesn't even remember the date of the Battle of the 4 Palaces? Xia Jiqing anxiously paced back and forth. Today was the day to confirm the number of disciples participating in the competition between the 4 temples. Although there were many disciples participating in the competition between the 4 palaces, not every disciple could participate. There were many disciples in Tiangang's sect. If every disciple were to participate, then who knew how long this battle of the 4 palaces would have to last? If Bailey Hongzhuang didn't appear today, then she wouldn't be able to participate in the battle of the 4 palaces tomorrow. Bai Junyu obviously didn't expect such a situation to occur. Hongzhuang shouldn't have gone out to cultivate, right? Should we go to the young sect master's bedroom to find her? The young sect master hasn't appeared for a long time. Maybe she isn't in the sect. Chapter 2207. Listening to Xia Jiqing's words, Bai Junyu's face also showed helplessness. Indeed, they were able to go to the young sect master's palace because Bailey Hongzhuang had led them. With their identity, it was impossible for them to set foot there. Even if Hongzhuang doesn't know, the young sect master should know. Bai Junyu couldn't understand. Such an important opportunity, Bailey Hongzhuang must not miss it. I think the palace master is also waiting for Hongzhuang, but if Hongzhuang doesn't appear, the palace master wants to give Hongzhuang a spot. I'm afraid it will only cause criticism. Xia Jiqing's face showed a strong sense of helplessness. Usually Hongzhuang would not be like this. What was going on this time? When Bailey Hongzhuang arrived at the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she saw Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu anxiously waiting. Her face suddenly filled with a smile. Jiqing, Junyu, what are you doing here? Suddenly hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's voice, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu were shocked. They only felt that this voice was like the sound of nature, and their eyes instantly turned to Bailey Hongzhuang. Hongzhuang, you're finally here. Xia Jiqing quickly trotted to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. Her delicate and beautiful face was full of anxiety. If you're a little later, I'm afraid there won't be a spot for the competition. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. What does this mean? Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang like this, Xia Jiqing knew that Bailey Hongzhuang had no idea what was going on. Today is the day to determine the spots for tomorrow's competition between the 4 palaces. Only 20 disciples of our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall can participate. Just getting a spot for the competition between the 4 palaces is not an easy thing. As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang's face was filled with surprise. She only knew that tomorrow's battle of the 4 palaces was very important, but she didn't know that there was a quota for the participants today. Di Beichen didn't tell her about this either. In fact, Di Beichen could not be blamed for this. This was because the palace lords were usually the ones to choose the quotas for the competition of the four palaces. With Bailey Hongzhuang's status, no matter what, Qin Ai would always leave a quota for Bailey Hongzhuang. However, the Battle of the Four Palaces this time was related to the Battle of Zhuolu. Every disciple paid close attention to it. That was why there was such a thing as a selection. It was to make these disciples accept it wholeheartedly. Di Beichen did not participate in the previous Battle of Zhuolu, so he naturally did not know about it. What's the situation now? What should I do? Bailey Hongzhuang asked quickly. She had been in seclusion for so long in order to get a quota for the Battle of the Four Palaces. If she didn't even have the qualifications to participate, wouldn't she be speechless? Hongzhuang, it is said that this time all disciples above the 5th level of the Green Realm can go in for the assessment. You must have already reached that level, so you should go in quickly. Xia Jiqing said quickly. Bailey Hongzhuang noticed that many disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were waiting outside the stone room. Some of the disciples had entered the stone room for the assessment. Those who were not qualified to enter or had already finished the assessment were waiting outside. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Then I'll go in first. The next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang quickly walked into the stone room. It was already late. If she didn't hurry up, she was afraid that she wouldn't have the opportunity to take the assessment. Chapter 2208. I thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was not going to participate in the competition of the four palaces. I didn't expect her to appear today. Although Bailey Hongzhuang is a disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she comes and goes without a trace. I haven't seen her many times in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang is the future wife of the young sect master. This matter is already set in stone. I think even the sect master has agreed. If I were Bailey Hongzhuang, then I would enjoy the resources of the sect. Why would I work so hard to participate in the competition of the four palaces? A group of female cultivators felt a strong sense of incomprehension towards Bailey Hongzhuang's behavior. The reason why they worked hard to cultivate was that they could only get sufficient resources after their strength was improved. They may also have a better life in the future. As for Bailey Hongzhuang, she was now a sparrow that had turned into a phoenix. There was no need for her to work so hard. What's more, if she didn't perform well in the competition of the four palaces, it would have a bad impact on her. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu listened to the thoughts of these female disciples and suddenly understood why these guys didn't have the opportunity to become a carp that jumped over the dragon's gate. Just this kind of thinking was already impossible. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen never had any dependent relationship between them. They were equal. After Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the stone room, she found that the stone room was unexpectedly spacious. There were several disciples lining up inside. After Qin Ai saw Bailey Hongzhuang appear, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. He was still worried that Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't appear today. If he forcibly left a spot for Bailey Hongzhuang, it would lead to criticism from the disciples. As the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall Master, even if the disciples criticized him, it wouldn't have any impact on him. However, after participating in the alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang finally had a certain amount of fame. If she was criticized again because of this matter, it was tantamount to returning to the past. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Qin Ai smile, she also bowed slightly. Every time she saw Qin Ai, she could feel Qin Ai's goodwill. In the process of waiting, Bailey Hongzhuang discovered that the disciples in the queue all walked towards the Brotherhood statue behind Qin Ai after obtaining permission. It was as if, according to the performance of the cultivator, the apparatus would give a corresponding grade. It was divided into 4 levels: heaven, earth, black and yellow. Among them, heaven was the strongest and yellow was the weakest. If the disciples' grade was only at the yellow grade, then they would definitely not be qualified. If it was the Shen rank, there might be a chance, but the chances were slim. If he reached the earth rank, the possibility of obtaining a spot would be very high. As for obtaining the heaven rank, that was definitely not a problem. Bailey Hongzhuang watched as one disciple after another came out of the apparatus. Most of the disciples were of the Shen grade, and occasionally there would be an earth grade. Once an earth-ranked disciple appeared, Qin Ai would record this disciple's name. It's really too difficult to obtain a spot. I don't know how this place determines the qualifications. Although my strength has reached the 5th level of the Green Realm, I don't think it's possible. There are so many disciples in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. There are only 20 spots in total. It's definitely extremely difficult to obtain a spot. Chapter 2209. Since you're just going through the motions, what are you doing here? What if there's a problem with the apparatus? Or what if my talent isn't tested? Wouldn't it be a waste? Besides, it's good to be recognized by the palace master. One of the disciples smiled. As soon as these words were spoken, many of the disciples present nodded in agreement. Many of them knew that they had no hope of passing the test. However, they still wanted to get lucky. Green Realm Level 5. This was a pretty good cultivation. If the palace master could remember them, it would be a good result. After waiting for the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, it was Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to go in for the test. Do your best to display your strength. Hold on for as long as you can. Qin Ai smiled at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang bowed slightly. Thank you for your guidance, palace master. When the crowd saw Qin Ai's kind attitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang, they were envious. This was the difference between them. So many disciples had participated in the test, but the palace master had never told any of them. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was able to receive the palace master's guidance the moment she arrived. Although everyone knew about this, they were still envious. Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the apparatus. The door of the apparatus was closed and no one outside could see what was happening inside. However, when the cultivator left the apparatus, the top of the apparatus would display the cultivator's previous performance. This was the first time Bailey Hongzhuang had seen such an apparatus. She had no idea what kind of test she would face once she entered. However, since Palace Master Qin had reminded her to hold on for as long as she could, she would hold on for as long as she could. As Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the apparatus and the door closed, the apparatus attacked her rapidly. In an instant, it was as if countless hands had appeared in the apparatus and attacked Bailey Hongzhuang. Every fist was filled with powerful force. Once it landed on the cultivator's body, it would be unbearable. The range of this device was very small, so the cultivator's range was also very small. They could only passively receive these attacks. Bailey Hongzhuang's reaction speed was very fast. After seeing the attack coming, she quickly blocked it. Today, her shape-shifting technique has reached the completion stage. Her body was like the wind, ethereal and formless. Fulgurating transposition was a very high-level movement technique, and its ability to dodge was even more impressive. Therefore, even though the range of the device was very small, Bailey Hongzhuang's dodging ability was still extremely shocking. If the cultivators could see the situation in the apparatus, they would definitely be amazed by Bailey Hongzhuang's dodging ability. This was because they could only see a figure changing rapidly like the wind in the device. They could not see its real movements at all. Bailey Hongzhuang's current cultivation was no longer the same as before, and her combat ability had also improved greatly. If it were her in the past, she probably wouldn't have been able to hold on for long. As the time Bailey Hongzhuang spent inside increased, the number and strength of the punches increased. Chapter 2210. After Bailey Hongzhuang entered the apparatus, the disciples who were waiting at the back all paid close attention to the situation of the apparatus. For an influential figure like Bailey Hongzhuang, her results had always attracted attention. I wonder how long Bailey Hongzhuang can last and what level she has reached? I only know that her alchemy skills are extremely powerful and she was the champion of the assessment competition. However, I have never seen her true abilities and have no idea at all. I feel that since Bailey Hongzhuang's alchemy skills are so powerful, her cultivation shouldn't be that strong. As the disciples' voice faded, the disciples present all nodded their heads. Alchemists were not powerful enough, and this was something that everyone knew. This was because alchemists put all their energy into alchemy and would not spend any more time on cultivation. After hearing the disciples' thoughts, a smile appeared in the depths of Qin Ai's eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang was the granddaughter of the sect leader, and this was not something that could be explained by common sense. Being the champion of the assessment competition was enough to prove how powerful Bailey Hongzhuang was. Ever since Bailey Hongzhuang came to Tiangang's sect, she had always been elusive and he was not sure what level of cultivation Bailey Hongzhuang was at. However, he believed that Bailey Hongzhuang's abilities would not disappoint him. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect leader, who was a cultivation maniac, were together. Presumably, both of them were cultivation maniacs. As Bailey Hongzhuang stayed in the apparatus for a longer period of time, the disciples' expressions changed. Bailey Hongzhuang has been in there for a long time. Why hasn't she appeared until now? I don't know. Isn't this apparatus used to determine a cultivator's talent level based on the length of time they stay in there? Bailey Hongzhuang can actually stay in there for so long. Isn't this too strange? Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang has some special method to stay in there and we don't know about it? The Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples were confused. Before this, they had seen many cultivators take the test, but they had never seen a disciple who could stay in there for such a long period of time. The longer the time, the more shocked the disciples became. I remember, that disciple who had reached the earth rank had stayed in there for so long. You should have come out by now? A disciple could not help but ask. This time was a little too long. Perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang has really reached the earth rank. After all, the cultivation resources that she has are incomparable to ours. It's not strange for her to reach this level. Another disciple voiced his opinion. Come on the path of cultivation, other than the cultivator's own talent and hard work, resources also played a large role. That being said, the disciple still felt sour grapes when he spoke. When Qin Ai saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had not come out after such a long time, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. It looked like Bailey Hongzhuang had not disappointed him. To be able to stay in the apparatus for so long proved that Bailey Hongzhuang had reached the earth rank. This kind of ability was enough to take part in the competition of the four palaces. Although Qin Ai could not be certain whether Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to perform well in the competition of the four palaces. Chapter 22:11. Qin Ai's gaze landed on the apparatus. It was about time for Bailey Hongzhuang to come out. However, after waiting for a while, Qin Ai saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had yet to appear and his expression instantly became interesting. This time was a little too long. The time for Earth grade had already been reached. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to reach Heaven grade? When this thought surfaced in Qin Ai's mind, even he himself felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Heaven grade, such a grade was extremely rare to appear. When Qin Ai made such a guess, the expressions of the Tiangang sect disciples became even more interesting. They had never seen it for such a long time. Bailey Hongzhuang actually stayed for so long and still hasn't come out. She couldn't have been knocked unconscious inside, right? When a cultivator voiced out his conjecture, the other disciples were also stunned. Speaking of which, such a situation had happened before. The attacks within the apparatus had always been very powerful. If one was not careful and was hit in a vital point, it was very likely that one would faint. Once the cultivator who entered the apparatus fainted, the apparatus would stop attacking. Back then there was a disciple who fainted forcefully. Everyone waited outside the apparatus for a long time, but there were no signs of her appearing. In the end, even the higher-ups were shocked. Everyone thought that a shocking genius had appeared in the sect. Who would have thought that the so-called genius was carried out in the end and had already fainted? It was really laughable. This story was very widespread in Tiangang sect. Later on, such a thing had also happened before. This is really hard to say. If Bailey Hongzhuang really fainted in the apparatus, it would be a big joke. Although from a certain point of view, the disciples did not believe that Bailey Hongzhuang would faint in the apparatus. However, if Bailey Hongzhuang did not faint, then Bailey Hongzhuang's grade would be close to Heaven grade. Between these two possibilities, everyone obviously believed in the former more. This was because the latter possibility was simply too unbelievable. Palace Master, should we check on Bailey Hongzhuang's situation? The elder beside Qin Ai could not help but suggest. They were well aware of the power of this instrument. Bailey Hongzhuang was young and she was also an alchemist. It was hard to believe that she could persist for so long. If Bailey Hongzhuang was really unconscious, they had to rescue Bailey Hongzhuang as soon as possible. Once Bailey Hongzhuang's vital parts were injured, it wouldn't be good for Bailey Hongzhuang for too long. Qin Ai frowned. He had never thought of such a possibility before. Now as time passed he was starting to worry. For so long he had never understood Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, so he could not determine the result. In an instant, all the disciples' gazes landed on Qin Ai. They did not know what decision the palace master would make. Let's wait for a while. Qin Ai muttered. He believed in Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. If Bailey Hongzhuang was really still persevering, wouldn't they destroy Bailey Hongzhuang's results if they turned on the apparatus now? After hearing Qin Ai's decision, the disciples could not help but sigh. They did not expect the palace master to have such high hopes for Bailey Hongzhuang. It was really unexpected. Chapter 22:12. Time continued to pass. After waiting for a while, Qin Ai noticed that Bailey Hongzhuang still had not emerged from the apparatus. His expression instantly turned into an ugly shade. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang's luck was really so bad that she had been struck in a vital spot by an attack from the apparatus and had fallen unconscious? This length of time had exceeded his expectations. Based on Bailey Hongzhuang's level of power, she should not have been able to hold on for such a long time. Palace Lord, let's open the door of the apparatus and take a look. The elder could not help but remind him. If Bailey Hongzhuang had really met with an accident in the apparatus, it would be a disaster. Hearing this, Qin Ai thought for a moment before nodding his head. Bailey Hongzhuang's status was extremely noble. If she had met with any danger and was not treated in time, he would not have the face to face the sect master. Then Qin Ai and the elder walked towards the apparatus. They had to ascertain that Bailey Hongzhuang was safe. When the cultivators who were watching from the sidelines saw Qin Ai's actions, their eyes lit up. It seems that the palace lord also believes that something has happened to Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang has definitely fainted in there. If this news were to spread, it would be a major piece of news. If Bailey Hongzhuang had really fainted, I'm afraid that she would not be able to obtain a place in the competition of the four palaces. Speaking of which, it would be rather embarrassing. Bailey Hongzhuang is a genius pill master. She should just focus on refining pills. There's no need for her to fight with us for such a small number of places in the competition. The disciples were delighted to see this. With one less competitor, their chances of obtaining a place in the competition would increase. This was undoubtedly the best outcome. Just as Qin Ai and the elder were about to open the door to the apparatus, a voice suddenly rang out. Then, under the astonished gazes of the crowd, Bailey Hongzhuang opened the door to the apparatus and walked out. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Qin Ai and the elders standing outside the door of the instrument, her face couldn't help but be filled with doubt. "All master elders, what are you doing?" Previously, when the disciples were taking the test, the palace master and the elders were standing at a relatively far place. Why were they suddenly here now? Upon hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Qin Ai and the elders' expressions froze for a moment. Soon after, they revealed somewhat embarrassed smiles. From the looks of it, Bailey Hongzhuang did not faint in the machine. "Bailey Hongzhuang, did you just finish the test?" The elder couldn't help but ask. He still couldn't believe that Bailey Hongzhuang had stayed in the device for so long that it was hard to believe. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and said matter-of-factly, "Yes." When the disciples saw Bailey Hongzhuang's reaction, they couldn't help but look at each other. Was Bailey Hongzhuang telling the truth? This must be fake, right? How could Bailey Hongzhuang have lasted for such a long time in the machine? Do you think it's possible that Bailey Hongzhuang fainted first but soon woke up again so she came out? After all, if she had really fainted in the machine, that would be an extremely embarrassing thing. She would never admit to it. What you said makes sense. That's very likely the case. The disciples nodded and confirmed this guess. Chapter 22:13. Qin Ai sized up Bailey Hongzhuang for a moment but did not say anything. He was also unable to fathom the situation in which Bailey Hongzhuang had entered the apparatus. Bailey Hongzhuang, who initially did not understand what had happened, suddenly understood after hearing the disciples' words. So, everyone had thought that she had fainted in the apparatus? The attacks in the apparatus were very concentrated and strong. It was not easy for her to deal with them. However, she had always kept Qin Ai's words in mind, so she tried her best to hold on for as long as she could. After all, she was determined to win the quota for the competition of the four palaces. She could not just hand it over to someone else. Hence, she had given it her all in the apparatus. As long as she could hold on for a long enough time, she would be able to win the quota without any dispute. As for how long she had been in there, Bailey Hongzhuang was not sure either. She had placed all her attention on dealing with the attacks and did not notice the passing of time. "Bailey Hongzhuang, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Qin Ai thought for a moment and decided to ask. He knew the power of the apparatus very well. If Bailey Hongzhuang had really stayed in there for such a long time, the attacks and power she had to endure would be very terrifying. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head gently and smiled. "Thank you for your concern, Palace Master. I'm fine." Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's reply, everyone in the stone room had a strange expression on their faces. In the next moment, a clear and large word appeared on the apparatus. However, when the crowd saw the contents clearly, the disciples present could not help but gasp. Even Qin Ai and the elder were surprised when they saw the two words written on it. They never thought that it would really end up like this. Heaven grade. It was a simple word, but it blinded the eyes of all the disciples present. Damn it, am I seeing things? Is that the heaven grade? Is it really the two words heaven grade? You're not seeing things. I saw those two words too. How long has it been since I've seen a cultivator who has reached the heaven grade? Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang an alchemist? Who can tell me why an alchemist can reach heaven stage? Don't stop me, I want some peace and quiet. The disciples didn't know what to say. This level proved that Bailey Hongzhuang hadn't fainted in the device. She had been holding on until now. Qin Ai's eyes instantly lit up. He had long expected that Bailey Hongzhuang's powers would not be weak. However, he never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would actually be able to reach the heaven stage. This result was enough for Bailey Hongzhuang to get a place in the competition. Bailey Hongzhuang, you've given me a huge surprise. Qin Ai did not hide his admiration and optimism. Previously, during the alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang had already given him a surprise. He did not expect that this time, Bailey Hongzhuang would give him an even bigger surprise. Even in the four palaces, there weren't many cultivators who had reached the heaven grade. This time, perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to bring glory to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall in the competition of the four palaces. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Her smile was elegant and beautiful. Palace Master, you flatter me? Qin Ai and the Palace Master next to him looked at each other and a smile appeared in their eyes. Chapter 22:14. If their results in the competition of the four palaces were too poor, then as palace masters and elders, they would also lose face. Although the four palace masters usually looked as if they did not care much, in fact, all of them hoped that their own disciples would be able to perform well in this competition of the four palaces. Bailey Hongzhuang could achieve such results. At least the strength of their Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had increased by a few points. The next moment, Qin Ai's gaze fell on the other disciples in the stone room, and a majestic aura instantly broke out. Regarding Bailey Hongzhuang's results, no one can leak it out, do you all understand? Bailey Hongzhuang had never shown her strength in cultivation since she entered Tiangang's sect. In the eyes of the other disciples, Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation was a mystery. In that case, why not hide Bailey Hongzhuang's strength first? In this way she could also become their Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's trump card. Yes, this disciple understands. As Qin Ai's voice fell, the disciples nodded one after another. They all understood Qin Ai's reason for doing so. Although in each palace hall, the disciples competed fiercely for the quota. However, when the battle of the four palaces truly began, they would belong to the same branch palace. Only when the disciples of the palace hall obtained a good ranking could they get more cultivation resources. Therefore, such a secret would never be leaked out. After receiving the disciples' answer, Qin Ai nodded and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang, you go back first. When the assessment is completely over and the participants have been decided, I will send someone to inform you. At that time, I will tell the 20 participating disciples about the rules of the competition and what to pay attention to. Facing Bailey Hongzhuang, Qin Ai's attitude was much gentler and more cordial. As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang understood that the quota for the competition of the four palaces was already in her bag. After walking out of the stone room, Bailey Hongzhuang saw Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu still waiting for her outside the stone room. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang come out, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu immediately greeted her. Hongzhuang, how are you? Did you get a spot? Xia Jiqing quickly asked. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded. I've already gotten a spot. As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's faces both showed a smile. That's great. I knew that with your strength you would definitely be able to get a spot. By the way, Hongzhuang, what happened in the stone room just now? We only heard a series of gasps as if something terrible had happened? Xia Jiqing's face was full of curiosity. Not only them, but the disciples outside the stone room were also very curious. If it wasn't for the fact that they couldn't go in to take a look, many disciples would have already gone in to check it out. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and said, actually nothing much happened. It's just that some of the disciples were of a higher level, so everyone was very surprised. Since Qin Ai told everyone not to spread this news, then he must have his reasons. Therefore Bailey Hongzhuang did not mention it. Then what do we do now? Go back? Bai Junyu asked. Previously he and Xia Jiqing had already been tested, but with the strength of the two of them, there was still a certain distance to get a spot. Chapter 22:15. There's nothing else, let's go back. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips were slightly raised, her smile was clear and charming. Along the way, Bailey Hongzhuang listened to Xia Jiqing talk about a lot of things that had happened recently. They often contacted Gong Xiaoqing and the others, and now Lu Qingyue often gathered with them. Although Lu Qingyue had not been in the alchemy hall for a long time, with her strength and beauty, she was very popular in the alchemy hall. Similarly, Gong Xiaoqing and Lu Qingyue's relationship also had some progress, and there were even disciples who challenged Gong Xiaoqing for Lu Qingyue. Bailey Hongzhuang did not know about these things before, but now she found it very interesting. After Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the house to rest for about 2 hours, a disciple came to find her, saying that the hall master had informed her to go to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang came to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall under the guidance of a disciple. This was the first time she came to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. This was naturally smaller than the Tiangang sect's hall, but it was red all over and looked very eye-catching. When Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, there were already many disciples gathered in the hall. Among them, Qin Ai was sitting on the main seat, looking at the disciples present with a smile. After Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, the eyes of some disciples fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. Suddenly many disciples frowned. When the other disciples were looking at Bailey Hongzhuang was also looking at the other disciples. With this look, Bailey Hongzhuang found that there were no familiar faces among the 20 disciples. Obviously, these disciples were the old disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, and it was extremely difficult for the new disciples to compete with the old disciples for this quota. After all, the old disciples' cultivation time was much longer than the new disciples, and their strength was naturally not comparable to the new disciples. Bailey Hongzhuang also got a quota? She is the only one among the new disciples. Could it be that she got the quota by relying on the young sect master? What's impossible about that? We don't have Bailey Hongzhuang's ability, so we can only rely on ourselves. The competition of the 4 palaces this time concerns the honor of our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall as well as the allocation of cultivation resources for our disciples. If we allow Bailey Hongzhuang to participate, wouldn't that be equivalent to us losing a spot for no reason? In this kind of matter, young sect master and palace master are actually so biased, it's simply too disappointing. A group of old disciples looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a bit of dissatisfaction. They were all disciples who cultivated blindly in order to make themselves strong enough to be outstanding. To them, Bailey Hongzhuang was someone who got in through the back door, so they were unhappy from the bottom of their hearts. As for Bailey Hongzhuang's performance in the alchemist competition, what did that have to do with cultivation? Since her pill refining skills were so good, then she should stay in the cultivation palace and not harm others here. Bailey Hongzhuang noticed the unkind gazes from the surrounding disciples, but she didn't mind it too much. Anyway, tomorrow was the start of the competition of the 4 palaces and their true abilities would be revealed on the tournament stage. Since everyone is here, then let me introduce the rules of tomorrow's competition. Qin Ai's voice slowly rang out. Chapter 22:16. The Battle of the 4 Palaces is divided into the preliminary round and the final round. The preliminary round uses the elimination system. 20 disciples from each side palace will take part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces. A total of 80 disciples will take part. There is no room for redemption in the preliminary round. Once you fail, you will lose the right to continue. In the first preliminary round, 40 out of 80 will remain. In the second preliminary round, 20 out of 40 will remain. In the third preliminary round, 10 out of 20 will remain. After the preliminary round, the remaining 10 disciples will enter the final round. The first round of the final round will be the same as the preliminary round. Out of 10 disciples, only 5 will remain. The last 5 disciples will take turns to fight and the disciple with the most wins will win the first place. Following Qin Ai's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest instantly understood. The rules were simple and easy to understand. They only needed to win 3 rounds in a row to enter the final round. As for the martial arts championship, every sect will have 10 places and the young sect master will participate as well. Hence, the disciples who have been eliminated in the first round of the final round will participate in the ranking round again to determine the places for the martial arts championship. Basically, as long as you enter the final round, you will more or less win a place for the martial arts championship. Qin Ai's face was filled with a faint smile. He knew that the disciples were very concerned about the martial arts championship. If he did not make this clear to everyone, they would be very anxious. Rather than that, he might as well make it clear to them. This way, everyone would be able to pay more attention to every round. Once they lost, they would miss the opportunity to enter the martial arts championship. Sure enough, when everyone heard this, their eyes immediately lit up. They only needed to do their best to win 3 rounds in a row and they would more or less win a place for the martial arts championship. Qin AI noticed the joy on everyone's faces and began to wake them up. It looks like you only need to win 3 rounds in a row to win a place, but winning every round is not an easy task. The disciples who are taking part in the Battle of the Four Palaces are the most outstanding disciples from each side palace, and their powers are definitely not weak. Hence, you must not harbor any feelings of love rivals. There was not much difference in the powers of the 4 palaces. Every battle of the 4 palaces was a fierce battle and the results would not be known until the end. It may seem easy to win 3 rounds in a row, but luck played a role in this as well. If you met a strong opponent as soon as you entered the arena, then you could only say that you were unlucky and were eliminated as soon as you entered the arena. However, other than the trump cards of the various branch palaces, the strength of the majority of the disciples was not too different. Therefore, the element of luck would be slightly better. Disciple will keep that in mind. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others replied with a salute. Bailey Hongzhuang thought to herself. The process of this competition was not complicated, but it was clear that winning each round was not an easy task. She didn't know much about the strength of the Tiangang sect's disciples. Similarly, she didn't know what level she was at. According to the situation of her cultivation with Di Beichen during this period of time, presumably her strength should not be too bad in Tiangang sect. These disciples were all older than her and had cultivated for a longer time than her. Moreover, she was not the only one who had obtained first place in the assessment competition. Chapter 22:17. In addition, I have one more thing to remind everyone. When your opponent's strength is not enough to display all your means, you can look at the situation and hide your strength. Once all your cards are exposed in the early stage, it is very likely that you will be targeted. Qin AI had been the palace master of Tiangang sect for so many years, so she was very clear about this situation. Once targeted, it would be even more difficult to win. The disciples nodded and remembered Qin AI's words in their hearts. Because the participants of the competition of the 4 palaces were all very famous disciples of the 4 palaces, this competition of the 4 palaces would go on for several days. Every time the competition of the 4 palaces was held, it was a big event for Tiangang sect. All the disciples would temporarily put aside their cultivation and other matters to watch the competition of the 4 palaces. After all, even if they couldn't participate, watching the battle of the powerful disciples could also make them gain some benefits. Therefore, each disciple would only participate in 1 battle a day. This was also to allow the disciples to recover their fighting strength better, so that they could break out their true strength on the martial arts stage. Speaking of which, only the first day had the most battles. The number of battles would decrease every day, but there would be more and more disciples watching. After Qin AI told everyone the things they needed to pay attention to, everyone left the meeting hall. Tomorrow was the day when the competition of the 4 palaces would begin. Everyone had to go back and prepare well for tomorrow's battle. The next day, Bailey Hongzhuang got up early. Because today was the 80th elimination round, there would be a total of 40 battles, so the competition of the 4 palaces would start very early. As for whether these 40 battles would be divided into 1 day or 2 days, this would depend on the situation. As soon as Bailey Hongzhuang walked out of the house, she found that there were many disciples outside the house who were setting off for the competition venue. It was the first time that Bailey Hongzhuang had seen such a lively scene. Hongzhuang, if you are ready, let's go together. Xia Jiqing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile. They were not qualified to compete, so today's main purpose was to watch Bailey Hongzhuang compete. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Okay. As a disciple who was going to participate in the competition today, he definitely couldn't be late. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 had already set off very early. However, when they arrived at the competition venue, they discovered that there was already a sea of people in the vicinity. As far as the eye could see, there was only a sea of black heads moving about. It was impossible to tell who was who. Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at the surrounding area that could hold tens of thousands of spectators, and she understood that this place must have been specially prepared for the battle of the 4 palaces. In Tiangang sect, perhaps only the competition between the 4 halls could attract so many people. Not only the disciples but the palace masters and elders had also arrived early. The 4 hall masters and the hall master of the alchemy hall had already sat down on the high platform. As they looked at the lively scene, they all smiled. In the middle of the 5 palace masters, there was an empty seat, which was obviously reserved for Di Baichen. After Bailey Hongzhuang looked around, she greeted Xia Jiqing and the other 2 and went to the area where the participating disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were located. Chapter 22:18. After all, if the participating disciples did not stay in one place to wait for the battle, it would not be easy for that person to walk up to the tournament stage from the crowd when the call came. The disciples from the 4 side palaces stood in 4 different areas and were not too far apart. At this moment they were full of energy and looked around in high spirits. Today was the stage for them to perform. As outstanding cultivators, they were very willing to let everyone know how powerful they were. By the time Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, more than half of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples had already arrived. She stopped at the back of the crowd. As soon as she appeared, Bailey Hongzhuang could feel a lot of disdainful gazes falling on her. Yesterday, ever since they found out that Bailey Hongzhuang would be taking part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces, the participating disciples had gone back to ask about the results of the test that Bailey Hongzhuang had entered the apparatus. However, all the disciples who were asked shook their heads as if they could not say anything. Most importantly, the palace lord had instructed them not to say anything. After finding out the answer, the participating disciples understood the answer even more clearly. They did not need to think to know that Bailey Hongzhuang's powers had not reached the standard to take part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces. It was only because of her status as the young sect master that Bailey Hongzhuang had been given a place. In order to cause an even bigger commotion, the palace lord had ordered all the disciples to keep their mouths shut. But so what if they had kept their mouths shut? One would only need to think carefully to know the answer. Hence, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with even more unfriendly gazes. They had relied on their own hard work to get to where they were today. Bailey Hongzhuang had only relied on one layer of relationship to obtain all of this so easily. Some of the disciples could not help but wonder if Bailey Hongzhuang would use this layer of relationship to directly obtain a place in the Battle of the Deer? If that was really the case, it would be too unfair to them. This Bailey Hongzhuang really likes to be in the limelight. Since she's an alchemist, she should just be an alchemist obediently. Why must she come here to join in the fun? I don't believe that young sect master will still give her a place in the battle for the throne if she can't enter the finals. That's right. If that's the case, even the young sect master won't be able to escape the gossip. The disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with displeasure. The other disciples in the group were all powerful people and they knew each other well. Only this Bailey Hongzhuang was nothing. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly when she heard the discussion of the disciples. It seemed that everyone had a lot of opinions about her. Master, these fellows' words are too harsh. I'll go scold them. Xiao He had always been hot-tempered. She could not hold back at all when faced with such a situation. Before Bailey Hongzhuang could stop her, Xiao He's angry voice rang out. What are you guys talking about? You don't know anything. If you don't have the power, just say it. Why are you still pretending to be all high and mighty? What other abilities do you have apart from belittling others? Xiao He placed her hands on her hips and stood on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. She looked as if she could hold back 10,000 men and compete to see who could scold the other more. The disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had originally wanted to ridicule Bailey Hongzhuang. No one had expected that Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast would actually start scolding her. Chapter 22:19. If Bailey Hongzhuang knew what these disciples were thinking, she too would not be able to resist ridiculing them. Yesterday she was just too lazy to bother about it, not that she didn't dare to bother about it. To her, the amount of criticism she had suffered along the way was just too much and she had long stopped caring about what others thought. After all, people lived for themselves and she couldn't be bothered about what others thought. But when Xiao He said that, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples' gazes all fell onto Bailey Hongzhuang. From their point of view, they didn't think that it was Xiao He who had scolded them. It must be Bailey Hongzhuang who had instigated her contracted beast to stand out and scold them. This move was truly despicable enough. What we've said is the truth. If you hadn't relied on your relationship with the young sect master, how could you possibly obtain the quota to take part in the competition of the 4 palaces? Tan Yuehan's face was filled with displeasure and anger. As a lady, she had put in a huge amount of effort to obtain her current position in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, which was filled with talents. Originally, she was the limelight in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. But ever since Bailey Hongzhuang appeared, everyone's attention had shifted onto Bailey Hongzhuang. On one hand, it was because Bailey Hongzhuang could possibly be the future young sect master's wife. On the other hand, it was because of Bailey Hongzhuang's outstanding looks. However, this Bailey Hongzhuang obviously didn't have a body constitution that attracted people's affection. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's background and looks weren't bad, but she was still the target of suspicion in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. However, ever since the alchemist competition had ended, the situation had changed and many disciples had changed their views towards Bailey Hongzhuang. She was originally feeling displeased, but Bailey Hongzhuang was only an alchemist and didn't have much interaction with her, so she didn't mind. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had now taken part in the competition of the four palaces, so naturally she felt extremely displeased when she saw Bailey Hongzhuang. "You idiot. My master got it with his own ability, and I'll say that you got it by relying on some messy connections." Xiao He was an expert at stirring up trouble. It did not care what other people said. Anyway, it did not know what they were talking about. All it needed to do was to slander them. Everything was that simple. "You're talking nonsense." Tan Lihan was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. It was obvious that Xiao He was furious. "You're the one who's talking nonsense. Your whole family is full of nonsense." Xiao He hopped on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. She was best at talking. Even if a few more people were to scold her, she would not be afraid at all. Xiao Bai was also good at fighting, but now that it saw that Xiao He was able to completely stun this guy, there was no need for it to step forward and show off its strength. Bailey Hongzhuang had never been afraid of shedding all pretense of cordiality. Usually, she couldn't be bothered to say it because she couldn't be bothered. However, when this kind of thing really happened, she didn't care in the slightest. Since so many people in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were not convinced, then she would make them completely convinced. There was only one way to do it: beat them up. "Bailey Hongzhuang, don't go overboard." Tan Lihan stared angrily at Bailey Hongzhuang. Her voice had not been the loudest, but she never thought that after Xiao He had spoken, she would be the only one to speak. Chapter 22-20. The Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples were all looking at the conflict between Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang with great interest. Previously, when everyone was verbally attacking Bailey Hongzhuang, they naturally didn't mind joining in. However, since Bailey Hongzhuang had started to retaliate no matter what, they still had to take into account the young sect master's identity. Even if they felt disdain towards Bailey Hongzhuang for breaking the rules to obtain such a quota, but the young sect master's identity was there. If they were to directly clash with Bailey Hongzhuang now, wouldn't that mean that they were dissatisfied with the young sect master and palace master Qin's decision? The bird that sticks out gets shot, so they would never do something that was disadvantageous to themselves. However, for a hothead like Tan Lihan to be willing to directly clash with Bailey Hongzhuang, they were happy to see that. Seeing that Tan Lihan had taken the initiative to provoke her, Bailey Hongzhuang lightly turned around and her cold and distant gaze sized up Tan Lihan for a moment. Her red lips parted slightly and her voice was cold. "Tan Lihan, from the beginning to the end, it was you who was attacking me and I didn't say a single word. Now you're asking me not to go overboard?" Bailey Hongzhuang's expression became increasingly cold and her eyes were as cold as ice. "I think you're the one who shouldn't go overboard." Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Tan Lihan's expression froze. From the looks of it, the matter indeed seemed to be as such. "That's not right." Tan Lihan wasn't intimidated by Bailey Hongzhuang's words as she continued, "Doesn't your contracted beast's words represent your own words? That's what you think, not what I said." Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was indifferent and her state was elegant. She didn't seem to care about Tan Lihan's words at all. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's indifferent look, Tan Lihan felt even more displeased. It was obvious that Bailey Hongzhuang was the one who had no ability. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang was standing at the top to criticize her. This was too funny. "Bailey Hongzhuang, I didn't expect you to be so good at quibbling. This must be how you got your ability to get in through the back door, right? You obviously don't have the strength, yet you still took up a spot. You are really shameless." Tan Lihan originally had some scruples about Bailey Hongzhuang's identity, but now that she was angry she couldn't care less. As soon as these words came out, the disciples present all looked at each other in dismay. It seemed that the conflict between Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang was about to escalate. No matter how calm Bailey Hongzhuang was in the face of Tan Lihan's accusation, she would definitely lose face. Just when everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to go crazy, Bailey Hongzhuang sneered and her lips curled into a mocking smile. Even if I got in through the back door, what has that got to do with you? If you have the ability, you can get in through the back door. If you don't have the ability, then shut your mouth. Besides, against a pig-like opponent like you, Bailey Hongzhuang disdained to get in through the back door. After Bailey Hongzhuang's words came out, she couldn't even be bothered to look at Tan Lihan. That look was filled with disdain towards Tan Lihan, and even looking at her was a waste of time. Tan Lihan was stunned. The disciples present were all stunned. Was Bailey Hongzhuang admitting that she had gotten in through the back door? But just as Bailey Hongzhuang had said towards Bailey Hongzhuang being able to get in through the back door, most of the disciples were envious and jealous. Who asked them to not be able to do it? Chapter 22-21. Through the back door? She really did not have that ability. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had actually said that she was a pig-like opponent? Bailey Hongzhuang was only a new disciple, and a new disciple who had spent all her energy on refining pills. Now she had actually said that she was a pig-like opponent? Tan Lihan only felt a surge of anger in her chest, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Based on her, Tan Lihan's ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, who would dare to say that she was a pig-like opponent? Just as Tan Lihan was about to rebut Bailey Hongzhuang, a low and cold voice rang out. Tan Lihan, since you are already well aware of it, why continue to fuss over it? Hearing this voice, Tan Lihan was slightly taken aback. She immediately looked towards the man who had spoken, and her face instantly turned red as she nodded. Bailey Hongzhuang also looked towards the man who had spoken. The man was handsome and his posture was steady and cold. His coldness was different from Gong Shaoqing's indifference. His coldness was more like a form of contempt. He despised everyone around him, so he was very cold. Because these people were unable to receive any of his attention. Shen Xiuhan, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 disciple, was a cultivation maniac. Usually, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples rarely saw Shen Xiuhan. Even if it was the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's internal competitions, Shen Xiuhan would not even bother to participate. However, even though Shen Xiuhan rarely appeared, his position as #1 was still extremely stable. He had a very high reputation in the hearts of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples. The existence of the most powerful cultivator had always attracted attention. Shen Xiuhan glanced coldly at Bailey Hongzhuang. It was just a glance, but Bailey Hongzhuang could clearly see that it was full of disdain. It was as if Bailey Hongzhuang, a person who had walked through the back door without any real talent, was beneath his notice. Compared to Tan Lihan's provocation, Bailey Hongzhuang felt that Shen Xiuhan's disdain was even more unpleasant. Who did this guy think he was? How dare he look at her with such a gaze? Fuck, this guy really knows how to act cool. When Xiao He saw Shen Xiuhan, she couldn't help but curse. It wasn't that she had never seen a pretentious person, but she had never seen such a pretentious person. Even young masters like Di Beichen, Wen Ziren, and even Mo Yunjue wouldn't dare to look at master with such a gaze. Who the hell did this guy think he was? As the #1 expert of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, if he doesn't show off, how can he show off how extraordinary he is? However, I'm curious if he can still maintain his arrogance and disdain when he's beaten to the ground. Xiao Bai sneered. Acting tough will get you struck by lightning. Xiao He, Xiao Bai, and Little White Lion were beasts who loved to show off. Now that there was someone who could show off better than them, they were very displeased. They should be the ones in charge of being in the limelight and having their own halo. The voices of the three beasts were not soft, and in an instant, all the participating disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall heard them clearly. Instantly, everyone's expressions became interesting. Shen Xiuhan's expression stiffened, and his expert demeanor was almost broken. Where had Bailey Hongzhuang found such a top-grade contracted beast? Shen Xiuhan had always shown such an attitude after coming to Tiangang's sect. Who dared to criticize him? Chapter 22-22. Even though his anger had reached its peak, Shen Xiuhan still managed to hold back his anger. As the #1 disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, if he were to argue with Bailey Hongzhuang like this, it would be a loss of grace. If word got out, it would be extremely disadvantageous to him. After all, he rarely argued with others on a daily basis. There was only one way for him to argue, and that was to teach the other party a lesson. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had not said anything. The ones who had spoken were Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beasts. If word of this got out, he would undoubtedly lose all face. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang could say that this matter had nothing to do with him. However, if he were to argue in secret, he would be too petty. Furthermore, teaching Bailey Hongzhuang a lesson was not urgent. After the Battle of the Four Palaces had begun, he would use his own power to make Bailey Hongzhuang understand that he was not acting pretentious. When the cultivators of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall saw that Qin Xiuhan had maintained his silence, their expressions became a little more interesting. It must be said that Qin Xiuhan's usual arrogant and cold style was not the least bit approachable. Many of the disciples were unhappy, but because of Qin Xiuhan's power, they could only swallow their anger. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang's 3 contracted beasts had directly exposed Qin Xiuhan's pretense, they felt extremely delighted. It must be said that they enjoyed a clash between cultivators of such status very much. Tan Lihan glared angrily at Bailey Hongzhuang, her bright eyes filled with anger and hatred. She had always admired Qin Xiuhan. From her point of view, Qin Xiuhan was her future man. Usually she worshipped Qin Xiuhan the most. Qin Xiuhan was her sky. As a female disciple, Qin Xiuhan was the main reason why she had been able to cultivate to her current level of power. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang's mockery of her, she was even more dissatisfied with Bailey Hongzhuang's insults towards Qin Xiuhan. No one had ever dared to say such things about Qin Xiuhan. The male god in her heart would not allow anyone to slander him. Tan Lihan had already remembered this grudge in her heart. The battle between the 4 palaces was about to begin. No matter how arrogant Bailey Hongzhuang was, she would not be able to stay arrogant for long. On the contrary, Qin Xiuhan was the main character of this battle. What she hoped for the most now was to be able to meet Bailey Hongzhuang on the tournament stage. However, in the competition between the 4 palaces, disciples from different palaces would face off against disciples from different palaces. She was afraid that she would not have much of a chance. With Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, it was impossible for her to enter the finals. For Bailey Hongzhuang, this incident was just an interlude. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang turned her attention to the stage. Under everyone's amazed and admiring gazes, a faint golden figure slowly appeared in everyone's line of sight. The 5 palace masters hurriedly stood up and bowed deeply to the handsome man who was slowly walking over. The man looked as if he had walked over under the sun, like the stars surrounding the moon, noble and elegant, unparalleled. In a split second, all the brilliance seemed to be enveloped by Di Beichen. Everyone's eyes were fixed on this figure. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly curled into a smile. Di Beichen was such a breathtaking existence. No matter where he was, he would always be the focus of attention. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.